My name is Zara, and today, at 29, I understood the meaning of family control, greed, and the fragile lines between love and obligation. For years, I had played the dutiful daughter, the one who never questioned, the one who quietly carried burdens, and the one my parents thought would bend without resistance. My father, Richard Hawthorne, 58, tall, rigid, with a voice that carried authority like a whip, had always reminded me of my place. My mother, Clara Hawthorne, 55, soft in voice but sharp in calculation, had perfected the art of silent judgment. My brother, Ethan Hawthorne, 32, charismatic but lazy, always seemed to inherit charm without effort, while my sister, Vanessa Hawthorne, 27, ambitious and cunning, could turn a smile into manipulation with frightening ease. I had been summoned to the old lake house that my grandmother, Evelyn Hawthorne, had left behind, a place filled with cedar-scented memories, laughter echoing from kitchens past, and the kind of sunlight that made dust motes look like tiny dancing fairies. But today, it felt like a courtroom, not home. My heart pounded as I crossed the threshold, knowing something sinister awaited. As I entered the main hall, my father's sharp voice cut through the air. "Zara, vacate the room." Now, the way he said it, there was no room for discussion. No warmth, just command. I froze, barely able to breathe. Across the room, Vanessa's lips curled in a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She was always calculating, always 3 moves ahead. I glanced at my mother, who was folding her hands delicately, face pale, her silence more menacing than words. My brother Ethan leaned against the wall, arms crossed, pretending indifference, but eyes scanning every movement. "Dad," I whispered, my voice low but steady. "Why?" "This is the house Grandma left us." Richard's jaw tightened. "Grandma left it to the family, not to you alone. We have our plans." His gaze shifted to Vanessa, who nodded subtly. The unspoken alliance sent a chill down my spine. I remembered the night my grandmother had died. I had stayed by her side when everyone else left. I had held her hand while she whispered stories of the past, secrets of our family lineage, the land, the trust funds. She had trusted me, and I had promised to protect her legacy. That promise now felt heavier than ever, like stones pressed against my chest. Clara finally spoke, voice smooth as silk, but sharper than knives. "Zara, you've always been stubborn. You think just because Grandma loved you, you can ignore family counsel." She stepped closer, the perfume she always wore mingling with the musty smell of old wood. "Vanessa is ready to manage the boutique expansion. Ethan will oversee the investments, and we will handle the legal proceedings. You will follow or step aside." My stomach twisted. Follow or step aside. Those words weren't guidance. They were threats. My life had always been dictated by their rules, but today I realized I could choose to break free. I took a breath and looked at each of them, letting my voice carry a calm I didn't feel. Grandma left me her trust. She entrusted me, not you. And she wanted it to be protected, not sold off, not leveraged, not diluted. I will honor that promise. Richard's eyes narrowed. "Do you think you can defy us? Defy the family?" "Yes," I said firmly, "because family is more than control and money. It's integrity, respect, and care. If you've forgotten what those words mean, I will remind you with my actions." Vanessa laughed softly. It was a quiet laugh, but it cut through the room. "You've always been dramatic, Zara. Even Grandma saw that. But this time, your drama won't win. You're alone." I shook my head slowly. "Alone? I'm never alone when I stand for what's right. You forget, Vanessa. I've learned from you. I've seen the manipulation, the selfish ambition. But I've also seen courage, love, and patience. and I know how to use them when it counts. Clara's hand trembled slightly, a small twitch. My father's face was tight, like leather stretched over a hidden fury. Even Ethan looked uneasy, shifting his weight. I could see cracks forming in the structure they had built around themselves. Then, without warning, I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder my grandmother had given me before she passed. It contained the amended will, the trust documents, and instructions explicitly stating that no part of the lake house or associated lands could be sold or leveraged without my consent for 20 years. Richard's eyes went wide. Clara's hand flew to her mouth. Vanessa froze mid-breath. Ethan stepped back, startled. Silence filled the room, thick and suffocating, as the reality of Grandma's foresight sank in. "No," I said, with a quiet authority that surprised even me. "Not unless it honors her intentions. And that means honesty, respect, and integrity. If you can't uphold that, you walk away." My mother's face drained of color. My father looked like someone had pulled the rug from under him. My brother's confident facade cracked. Vanessa's ambitious gaze faltered, revealing for a moment the fear beneath her calculated exterior. And for the first time in years, I felt a surge of power, not the kind that comes from dominance or intimidation, but from truth, clarity, and human integrity. I realized then that the real inheritance Grandma left me wasn't just the lake house. It was the wisdom to recognize who could be trusted, the strength to uphold principles, even in the face of family pressure, and the courage to enforce boundaries. As they stood there, frozen and silent, I felt a warmth settle in my chest. This was the moment where the cycle of manipulation, greed, and control ended. Not with anger, not with drama, but with deliberate action, grounded in principle. I looked at each of them, one by one: Richard, Clara, Ethan, Vanessa. The people I had called family all my life. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to beg. The clarity of my stance was enough. And then I whispered to myself, almost as a vow, "This house, this legacy, this family, it will be protected. And I will be free." Outside, sunlight streamed through the cedar windows, dust motes dancing like tiny sparks of hope. The lake reflected a calm I had not felt in years. It was a cinematic moment, yes, but it was also real, human, honest, and mine. The house felt heavier than usual. Every corner echoed with memories of arguments, laughter, and secrets buried deep within the walls. I, Zara, had just stepped inside after the funeral, my husband's passing still fresh in my mind. The weight of grief pressed against my chest, yet a different tension lingered now. It wasn't just sadness, it was anticipation, an uneasy curiosity about what my parents and siblings would say next. In the living room, I could hear Mom, her voice low, strained but carefully measured. "He left everything to her," she whispered. Dad's response was sharp, almost clipped. "We didn't raise her to take advantage," he said. I froze mid-step, realizing they were speaking about the inheritance, about what my husband had entrusted to me. My brother Ethan and his pregnant wife Leila were waiting just beyond the hallway, oblivious to the tension, expecting perhaps a normal greeting. I took a deep breath, grounding myself in the reality that had shifted overnight. Every word from my parents felt like a test, a subtle push to see how I would react. But I wasn't a young girl anymore. I wasn't vulnerable in the way they assumed. I had survived loss before, and I had learned lessons that money, property, or threats could never teach. "Vacate the room," Dad repeated, louder this time. My hands clenched into fists, but I kept my composure. I knew this was less about rooms or property. It was about control, pride, and ego. I stepped into the living room fully, letting my presence speak louder than words. Mom looked at me, her eyes wide, searching for hesitation. "Zara, this isn't It's complicated, she said, her voice trembling just slightly. Complicated? I thought about the years of subtle manipulations, of invisible judgments and comparisons with my sister Maya, of the silent competitions that shaped my childhood. Complicated was the word they used to mask selfishness. I crossed the room slowly, each step deliberate. Complicated doesn't change reality, I said softly, but firmly. He trusted me, and I will honor that trust. My voice resonated in the empty room, and I could see it unsettled them. Dad's jaw tightened. Mom's hands twisted together. Ethan looked confused, and I knew he hadn't been fully aware of the dynamics I had carried silently for years. The truth was simple, though heavy. I had inherited not just material wealth, but responsibility. Responsibility to preserve memory, integrity, and fairness. My husband had always believed in teaching by example, in leaving legacies that weren't just about money, but about values. And now that responsibility was mine. You can't expect us to just accept this, Dad said, finally breaking the silence, frustration edging his tone. I tilted my head slightly. I'm not asking you to accept it. I'm stating a fact. This is what he wanted, and I will uphold it. The air seemed to thicken, the unspoken battle lines drawn between entitlement and principle. Mom's eyes flickered to Maya, who had been quiet until now. She's always had everything she wanted, Mom said under her breath. Maya's gaze shifted to me, her usual confidence shaken. I realized in that moment that the real power wasn't in possessions. It was in clarity, in the courage to act according to one's principles. I moved to the window and looked outside. The garden was untouched, sunlight reflecting off the dew, a serene contrast to the storm inside. It reminded me that life continues, regardless of arguments, greed, or resentment. The lesson was clear. The world doesn't pause for family disputes, and neither could I. Ethan stepped forward cautiously. Zara, maybe we can negotiate, he said. His words were innocent, yet laden with expectation. I turned to him, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. Negotiation is possible, I said, but not at the cost of ethics, not at the cost of respect for those who are gone. He nodded slowly, understanding more than he let on. I remembered my husband's words. Integrity is not about winning. It's about standing firm when no one is watching. Those words were my armor now, and the room could feel it. Mom's eyes welled up, Dad's hands twitched slightly, but no one spoke. Even Maya's lips pressed together tightly, her pride evident, but softened by the weight of truth she could no longer deny. I walked to the mantel and touched the framed photographs of my husband and me. He believed in leaving a legacy, I murmured. Not just in wealth, but in fairness. I intend to honor that. Every word I spoke carried a quiet authority, a calm determination that seemed to reverberate through the walls. Hours passed like this, tense and silent, punctuated only by whispers, shifting chairs, and the occasional clearing of throats. Eventually, Dad exhaled, a long, slow release that sounded like reluctant acceptance. Mom avoided my gaze, but her shoulders loosened slightly. Maya remained still, but I could see her mind turning, calculating, realizing that resistance against principle was futile. By the time I left the room, I felt lighter, not because they had accepted my stance, but because I had affirmed it. That affirmation wasn't just for them. It was for myself, for the memory of my husband, and for the values we had cherished together. In the hallway, I paused, looking back once. The room was unchanged, yet different. The air held tension, yes, but also an unspoken acknowledgement. The drama of inheritance, the subtle battles over control, the raw human emotions, fear, pride, envy, love, and respect, had all played their part. But I had emerged not victorious in a material sense, but whole in a human one. I realized then that true power wasn't in possessions or in victory over others. It was in the calm assertion of one's principles, in the courage to act with integrity, even when family pressures you to conform. And that lesson, more than any inheritance, was the treasure my husband had entrusted to me. As I stepped outside into the fading afternoon light, I felt a quiet resolve. The house, the rooms, the legacy, they were mine to protect. Not to dominate, not to control, but to honor, and in doing so, to teach a lesson my family would carry long after today. The morning after the confrontation, the house felt hollow. Sunlight spilled through the windows, but it didn't warm me. It merely illuminated the cracks, the spaces where trust had been broken, where intentions had clashed. I moved silently through the living room, my steps careful, measured like I was navigating a fragile ecosystem. Every glance from the corners of the house felt like a judgment. Every muffled conversation felt like a trial I hadn't consented to. I found myself in the library, dust motes floating in the beams of light, and for a moment, I let myself sink into the memory of simpler days, of laughter unburdened, of conversations that didn't have a subtext of obligation or manipulation. The air smelled faintly of old books and polished wood, grounding me. I realized then how much I had been carrying, not just inheritance, not just confrontation, but years of expectation, guilt, and the quiet suffocation of familial control. The first call came from my brother. He sounded hesitant, weighed down by an invisible load. Are you okay?" he asked. His voice was cautious, like he feared my answer. And in that instant, I understood something crucial. Vulnerability is a language. It isn't weakness. It's information, it's guidance, it's an invitation for connection. I breathed slowly, letting him hear the calm in my voice. "I'm okay," I said. "I'm better than okay. I'm learning." Later that day, I walked by the windows overlooking the garden. Light reflected off the dew on the grass, and the tranquility outside contrasted sharply with the tension inside. I remembered lessons my grandmother had whispered to me years ago. During quiet afternoons at the lake house, strength isn't loud. Authority isn't shouted. Control isn't seized. It is quiet, it is deliberate, it is resilient. By evening, the conversations had shifted. What had been whispered behind closed doors became tempered acknowledgement. The first real shift came when someone dared to approach me, offering collaboration instead of coercion. And I realized, teaching doesn't come from outrage. It comes from modeling boundaries, from demonstrating integrity, from responding calmly when chaos insists on entry. As the day closed, I reflected on the subtle victories, the respect earned not through confrontation, but through steadfastness. I wasn't seeking revenge nor validation. I was cultivating a space where my decisions mattered, where my actions resonated with principle rather than fear. And in that calm, I felt a truth I could finally own. Family, power, and inheritance are all transient. Character, trust, and self-respect are permanent. The house, the properties, the disputes, they are instruments. What they teach depends entirely on the choices I make when faced with them. I didn't know how long I stood there, the envelope trembling in my hand, Daniel's quiet presence beside me, anchoring the storm of thoughts swirling inside. Every memory of that house, of the apartments of the sea, every step I had taken alone, suddenly felt heavier, yet strangely lighter. The weight was not in the property itself, but in the years of control, judgment, and expectation that had been placed on me by my parents and siblings. Moments before, I had overheard my father speaking with my brother, Eric, and his pregnant wife, Sophie. Their words were like ice creeping along my spine, each syllable reminding me that inheritance, family loyalty, and survival were entangled in a web I didn't ask to weave. My mother's voice, sharp and commanding, had lingered in the hallway as I passed by. She had said something that made my stomach drop. She doesn't know yet. She thinks it's over. I had learned long ago that my parents had always believed control was power. Marcus Whitmore had crafted every family gathering into a theater of authority, every compliment laced with expectation, every smile veiled threat. Helena Whitmore had been the silent enforcer, her approval conditional, her disappointment suffocating. And Vanessa, my sister, she had learned early to wield charm and ambition as tools to manipulate outcomes. And yet, here I was, 29 years old, standing on the precipice of a new chapter, facing the very people who had spent decades trying to shape, break, or bend me. The thought should have terrified me, but it didn't. Not entirely. I had learned something essential. Autonomy, self-respect, and clarity were the only inheritance worth protecting. I slipped inside the old lake house, the floorboards groaning under my weight like the house itself remembered every summer, every secret, every conversation held in hushed tones. Daniel trailed behind me, his hand brushing mine briefly, a subtle promise that I wasn't alone. My fingers lingered on the doorway, feeling the cedar's warmth, inhaling the faint scent of pine mixed with old varnish. The essence of home, of memory, of what I was determined to protect. "Lana," Daniel said softly, "they might try again." I nodded, not out of fear, but acknowledgement. They always try. Family, power, pride, they intersect in ways designed to confound, confuse, and control. I had learned to move through it with intention, not reaction. By noon, the first visitor arrived. Aunt Miriam. She didn't knock, didn't announce herself. She simply appeared, eyes cautious, lips tight. She had always been my quiet Ellie, the one adult who saw not only what my parents projected, but what they truly felt. Fear disguised as authority, desperation hidden beneath control. "They're escalating," she whispered. "Your father has defaulted on part of the estate, and Vanessa, she's considering her moves. You need to prepare." I took a deep breath. The challenge wasn't just financial. It was emotional, legal, ethical. Protecting myself didn't mean cutting off family. It meant redefining boundaries, asserting presence without aggression, enforcing limits without apology. I had learned through 29 years of navigating their manipulation that authority could only be met with clarity, patience, and unwavering self-trust. We spent the next hour reviewing documents left by my grandmother. Every clause, every codicil, every protective measure she had put in place spoke volumes about foresight, intelligence, and love without control. I realized then that inheritance wasn't about money. It was about lessons, structure, and preparation. My grandmother had prepared me, even if she never spoke the words aloud. Daniel watched me carefully, his quiet support a mirror of the principle I was learning. Strength does not need to roar. Strength needs only to be deliberate, calm, grounded. And then, mid-afternoon, the phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. My heart sank. Instinctively, I knew. It was another move in this long game. "Hello," I said, voice steady. The line was silent for a moment before a man's measured voice cut through. "Ms. Whitmore, we represent Sterling and Klein Holdings. We are reviewing your assets and trust arrangements. Your family's previous claims are being contested legally. We suggest cooperation." I closed my eyes briefly. Cooperation, in their vocabulary, always meant surrender. But I had spent decades redefining my own terms. "I understand," I replied. "But any engagement will be fully documented, mediated, and compliant with legal protections outlined by my grandmother's trust. No emotional leverage, no coercion, no shortcuts." The pause on the other end was telling. Predators do not respect clarity until it is absolute. I had learned to wield it. By evening, the lake house stood bathed in the golden glow of the sunset. Daniel and I walked along the dock, the water reflecting a calm I rarely felt in life, but now recognized as earned. My fingers trailed across the wooden railing, grounding me, reminding me of lessons hard learned. Autonomy is earned, trust must be measured, and boundaries are the invisible walls that preserve identity. Aunt Miriam returned briefly to give updates on Venus's movements, which, though strategic, were no longer a threat. I realized as I watched the horizon that control is a temporary illusion. Emotional stability, clarity, and preparedness are permanent. That night, alone in the lake house, I finally allowed myself to acknowledge the truth. I didn't need to save anyone who refused to be helped. I only needed to ensure that the lessons, protections, and boundaries my grandmother instilled were upheld. I could love without submission, act with empathy without enabling, and choose clarity over chaos. As I drifted into sleep, the gentle rhythm of the waves against the shore reminded me, the only inheritance worth safeguarding is the one of self, resilience, wisdom, and the courage to define one's own life. The dawn broke like a quiet promise, golden streaks spilling across the lake, as if the world itself knew something profound had shifted overnight. I sat by the window, Daniel's hand warm on mine, and allowed myself to breathe deeply, a full, unhurried breath that carried with it every lesson, every wound, every triumph from the last 29 years of my life. For the first time, the house, the apartments, the inheritance, they felt secondary. What mattered was the clarity, the independence, the voice I had fought to reclaim. Over the past few weeks, the house had become a crucible. My parents, my sister Vanessa, even Eric and Safi, had tried to assert control, to weave fear and expectation into my decisions. But every manipulation, every subtle threat, every smile veiled in judgment, had taught me a single vital truth. Family could only reach me if I allowed them to. Respect, trust, and love were not owed by default. They were negotiated through boundaries, consistency, and authenticity. By mid-morning, the first confrontation arrived. Vanessa stepped through the doorway, her usual charm carefully polished, eyes sharp as daggers beneath their calculated warmth. She attempted to sway Daniel and me, painting narratives of obligation, legacy, and loyalty. But her words, rehearsed and predictable, fell flat. I listened, not out of defiance, but out of understanding. Every syllable was a window into her fears, her ambition, her dependence on control as a measure of self-worth. "Vanessa," I said finally, voice calm but resolute, "I will not engage in games. The estate, the assets, the apartments, these are protected not because I fear conflict, but because I respect the principles of fairness, foresight, and integrity. You may choose to act otherwise, but that is your path, not mine." Her smile faltered, just slightly, as if the words themselves carried weight she had never expected. For the first time, I realized she saw me, not as the girl manipulated by mom and dad, not as a rival to be subdued, but as a fully realized person, capable of decision, consequence, and grace. Later that afternoon, my father approached. His expression was taut, a mix of pride and frustration, tempered by disbelief. He had spent decades attempting to mold me into a reflection of his ideals, and yet here I stood, autonomous, unwavering, and entirely myself. "Lena," he began, voice low, measured, "I see, you've changed." I nodded, not needing his approval, but acknowledging the rare moment of connection. "I have," I said. Not because of anger or resentment, but because I chose growth, clarity, and understanding. The years of control, judgment, and expectation taught me to define my own life, not in opposition to you, but in alignment with who I truly am. By evening, the lake house felt alive in a way I had never experienced. The windows reflected the setting sun like mirrors to the soul, Daniel at my side, Aunt Miriam quietly observing, and the quiet hum of water lapping against the shore grounding every thought. This was no longer about inheritance or property. It was about legacy, the kind that teaches, protects, and empowers, not confines. I reflected on the lessons. Resilience is cultivated in silence, strength is measured in clarity, and authenticity is the currency of meaningful relationships. My grandmother's foresight had safeguarded me in ways invisible but indelible. My parents, flawed as they were, had unwittingly contributed to my education, not in the ways they intended, but through challenge, adversity, and expectation. Night fell, but I remained awake, watching the stars emerge one by one. Daniel slept nearby, a quiet anchor, and I allowed myself a rare moment of introspection. I realized that the greatest inheritance anyone could receive is not wealth or property, but the tools to navigate life. Emotional intelligence, courage, foresight, and empathy. I had learned to act without aggression, to love without enabling, to trust without surrendering my boundaries. The next morning, I convened with legal advisors, ensuring that every detail was documented, every decision transparent, every boundary enforceable. There would be no ambiguity, no room for manipulation, no missteps. I understood now that empowerment comes not from reaction, but from preparation, presence, and a profound understanding of human nature. And then finally, the message I had been waiting for, a note from my mother, handwritten, trembling in both penmanship and emotion. It read, "I see you now. Not as a child, not as a project, but as Lena. I hope we can rebuild what is real." Tears welled in my eyes, not of sadness, but of recognition. Forgiveness and understanding were not immediate, nor did they erase the past. But they illuminated a path forward, a path grounded in authenticity, empathy, and choice. As Daniel and I walked along the dock one last time, the horizon a canvas of gold and violet, I whispered aloud what I had long understood, but only recently fully embraced. Life is not about escaping family, wealth, or expectation. Life is about embracing yourself, carrying lessons learned, and defining boundaries that allow love and growth to coexist with integrity and clarity. And in that moment, I felt it, a release, a freedom, a profound sense of human resilience. I was no longer a product of manipulation or expectation. I was Lena, 29, flawed, strong, capable, and entirely my own. The lake shimmered beneath the moonlight, a reminder that every wave carries both challenge and opportunity. And as I turned to Daniel, hand in mine, I realized that the story was no longer about loss, inheritance, or control. It was about life, lived fully, authentically, and with unwavering courage. Watching the journey unfold, I can't help but feel a mix of admiration and reflection. Reading how Lana navigates the emotional maze of her family, her parents' control, Vanessa's manipulations, and the constant expectations, made me pause and think about the challenges we all face in defining our own path. What really struck me was how she handled each confrontation, not with anger or rebellion, but with clarity, empathy, and firm boundaries. I feel like this story is more than just a family drama. It's a lesson on resilience and self-worth. Lana's ability to stay authentic while facing judgment and manipulation is inspiring. It reminds me that sometimes the hardest battles aren't external, they are internal, the ones where we decide to honor our own voice over the voices of those trying to define us. What resonates most with me is the subtle emphasis on learning and growth. Even when faced with parents who had unrealistic expectations, Lana found a way to transform that pressure into insight and self-empowerment. It's a message that anyone watching can take. Your circumstances don't define you. Your choices do. Honestly, if I were in her shoes, I think it would have been easy to react with bitterness or resentment. But the way she balanced emotion with wisdom, forgiveness with self-protection, makes this story feel real, human, and deeply educational. It's a reminder that life isn't about controlling others. It's about controlling how you respond, how you grow, and how you shape your own path. I definitely share this story with friends or family because it's not just entertaining, it's thought-provoking. It makes me reflect on my own boundaries, my own courage, and how I approach complicated relationships. Stories like these are rare because they combine drama, authenticity, and a clear life lesson without feeling preachy. Thanks.